Our program tonight is Recovering Women's Stories from the Ancient Documents collection, which of course means we have to begin with what are the ancient documents. These are quite simply, but also complicatedly, the surviving filings of the Dutchess County Courts of Common Pleas and General Sessions. So your Common Pleas is your civil court, your General Sessions is your criminal court. And this collection runs from the beginning of those courts in 1721 all the way up until 1889, roughly when the modern unified court system was created. So we have an estimated 350,000 pages of material, and these are all sorts of document types. You'll see various ones of them tonight: narrations, depositions, arrest warrants, all kinds of stuff which give us wonderful insights into the lived experience of folks in Dutchess County in the past, but somewhat limited insights as well. As Bill noted, we've been working on this project for since 2013, and we've had a rotating cast of characters who have helped us with rehousing material from old bankers' boxes and to modern folders and archival boxes, numbering unnumbered material, indexing it. One of the key authors of the success of that project is Jackie Harbison, who's one of our clerks here at the Department of History. So thank you, Jackie, for your great work. Thanks to Kathleen Leonard and many others who have participated along the way. What you see on your screen currently is the same thing you'll see if you go to your web browser and direct it to dutchessny.gov, Ancient Documents. That's the landing page for our online search portal. It's got some basic instruction there, and if you hit that blue button that says Continue to the Ancient Documents search, you'll then go on to the actual search portal where you can search by various keywords and topics as well as by actual document number. We've imaged just over 130,000 pages currently. We've got another 15,000 pages under imaging right now. The material is out at our contractor that does this for us at a professional facility. And those of us in the office here at 22 Market Street are preparing to select the vendor for the 9th phase of work. So that is an ongoing mission, and we hope, maybe in another decade or so, it's job security, to get the entirety of this collection indexed and imaged and up online for you. But for the moment, and as of last week, you can now see almost 70,000 pages of material online. So what are we talking about tonight? When we look at court records, you see all sorts of nitty-gritty elements that are not preserved in other source material. Many of the great historians of the courts here in New York, including folks like Jim Foltz and Jeff Huth, like to remark that in court documents, you see evidence of the very highest levels of society, the richest of the rich, and also the poorest of the poor. And while you might be able to find material on that upper echelon of society elsewhere, because those are the folks whose papers and correspondence and maps and survey books are preserved, information on the lower ranks of society tends to get lost because it's simply not preserved by subsequent generations. So court records are really important for giving us an idea of how those folks on the ground lived. They give us those little pinprick windows into their lives. They also give us an idea about how folks higher up the elite ladder exercise their power and influence through legal processes. So as you can see tonight, we're going to be going across time and also across that social scale from sort of the bottom to the top and then back again, beginning in 1721 and ending in 1806. All of the tales that we're talking about tonight focus on women and to the best degree possible preserve the voices of those women. But we have to throw out the disclaimer immediately that most of these voices are filtered to a greater or lesser degree through the eyes, ears, brains, and writing quills of men, because these records were set down by clerks in the county clerk's office and working for the Dutchess County courts. Sometimes those clerks attempted to record the exact words of these women, particularly in examinations and depositions. In other cases, however, they sum up that testimony or they give a bit of a description of what happened. And while that's not ideal, it still gives us a better idea of the lived experience of women during this time period in early Dutchess. than we would have otherwise. So that's just to say it's an imperfect source from the beginning. There really are very few perfect sources as far as preserving women's own voices, particularly from that lower part of the social order. The other issue about court documents is they tell you a lot about a little. And so far as the incident that is up for debate in court, there tends to be a fair amount of detail on it. Where these folks came from and what happened to them afterwards is often, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story, that's lacking. And research continues on to try to uncover those elements. But as we move through tonight, part of our discussion will be about the strengths of these records for recovering these voices and these stories, but also the weaknesses of those records. And I should point out that we are going to be discussing some topics that are not for the most sensitive of souls. We're going to be touching on violence, on some romantic activity. We're sort of doing a pass by of enslavement and various other things, because court records do not preserve examples of good behavior, just bad behavior, which is why I personally find them so intriguing. All right, so our first case tonight actually comes from the very beginning of legal records here in Dutchess County. This is not actually from the Dutchess County Ancient Documents collection. This is from one of our other collections, the records of the Board of Supervisors. And that was the body of men who governed Dutchess County from 1714 all the way up until the Charter of 1967, which created our modern county government, and among other things, also created the office of Dutchess County Historian, enshrined in local law. So we here in the office feel quite fondly about the Charter of 1967. But those supervisors' minutes go all the way back to 1717. I know the first supervisor set in 1714. We're not entirely sure where they kept those records. And the book from 1717 begins actually with a recounting of all of the back taxes that Dutchess County owed the colony of New York, which is one of the reasons why independent government and eventually courts were set up in the county, because from 1690, we had been under the administrative purview of Ulster County due to the very small size of the population in Dutchess. And for those who are wondering how small is small, there was a census in April of 1714. Now, at that point in time, Dutchess County included all of modern Putnam County and a pretty decent slice of what is now Columbia County, or at least southern Columbia County. In all of that area, the census takers recorded a grand total of 447 people. And we know it's 447 because we, the historians, have done the math. They themselves recorded all of these folks and then came up with the number of 445. So that just tells you math has been a difficult skill for hundreds of years now in America. But at the end of this period of setting up local government, 1714, they have the first elections. 1721, they finally establish the courts. There's a meeting of the county courts in October 1721 where they have a little bit of business. Then they recess until May of 1721. But as you can see here, in November of that year, one of the justices, Leonard Lewis, and his colleague Barrett Van Cleek, held what we would call a Justices of the Peace Court here at the courthouse. Well, yes, actually at the courthouse in Poughkeepsie. The courthouse story is a whole another presentation for another time. I find it remarkable, however, that this first case that we have a record of involves two women and the issue of taxation. So on the left there, you see an excellent example of early 18th century handwriting at its very best. We will see some examples as we move through tonight of less legible examples of early 18th century handwriting. You have your transcript there on the right for those who want to follow along. So this is Sarah Hoogbottom against Elena Van Den Bogart. And the problem is Elena Van Den Bogart has a license to sell liquor. She probably runs a small tavern here in Poughkeepsie. The problem is her license has kind of gone out of, it's expired. It's gone out of date a little bit, which is not really the issue that befuddles and concerns the justices. It's more that she's not paying that excise tax. Tax is one of those themes that links all periods of New York history together. And of course, Sarah Hoogbottom is a little concerned for reasons that are not especially evident, that Elena Van Dane Bogart has not been paying her taxes. So she goes ahead and denounces her to the court. They hold this session and they decide, you know what, this will all be fine as long as Elena Van Dane Bogart pays the back taxes that she owes and, gets her license renewed the following year. And of course, they're going to reward Sarah with 3 skipples of wheat. Skipple of wheat is a Dutch measurement system for wheat. And as we'll see moving forward into our next case, wheat is the major crop in Dutchess County in the 18th century. It's also how landlords tend to collect their rent. Very little in the way of hard specie in New York or in the North American British colonies at this time. So a lot of things are taken in kind payments, including potentially alcohol. So that's where our story begins, at the very beginning of the courts here in Dutchess County. Unfortunately, we don't have any other information on Elena and Sarah, but we do have a lot on the focus of this next story, Katharina Brett. So Katharina Brett, her maiden name is Rombout. She is the daughter of Francis Rombout, who is one of the folks who sets up one of the earliest and largest land patents here in Dutchess County. And essentially how Dutchess County develops is in 1683, then Governor Thomas Dongan has the Colonial Assembly pass an act setting up the original 12 counties of New York. Many of those counties along the eastern side of the Hudson River are kind of counties on paper, but not a whole lot of European settlers living there. The reason that they're set up is because Dongan and the rest of the Colonial Assembly are a little worried that all of those folks living in Connecticut and Massachusetts might just decide that it would be far more fashionable to have their western borders resting on, say, the Hudson River than on the Housatonic River. And that's a big problem because, remember, again, taxes. Key idea here. If you lose all of that territory to those other colonies, you lose all of that taxation, and then things get complicated with tolls crossing the river, as we know all too well today. So the government sets up these counties, and then these individual rich men, mostly, go in and purchase land grants from the Native Americans. Those are then sent over to the Crown to be confirmed. And we'll see in just a second why the Rombout precinct is such a big deal. Katharina is Francis Rombout's daughter. She marries a guy named Robert Brett, who is with the Royal Navy. Unfortunately, Robert Brett drowns in the Hudson River around about 1712. Katharina Brett is a very young widow with a lot of children, but also with a lot of land. And because Dutch law influences colonial law in New York, Katharina Brett is actually in a wonderful legal position. As a widow, she has full title and full legal control over all of her husband's land, which is a portion of her father's land. She doesn't have to answer to any men. And if you want to learn more about Katharina Brett, I suggest you check out the 1992 issue of the Dutchess County Historical Society yearbook, which is completely dedicated to her and available for free at dchsny.org/yearbook. That is the first of our commercial announcements this evening, but far from the last. So if you've been looking at this document and my transcript of it while I've been talking about the larger picture and wondering, is there something wrong with the screen resolution? Do I need to go up a prescription with my glasses? Have I maybe had one too many glasses of wine to begin the evening? Don't worry, it's not you. It is the fact that this document is actually in Dutch. It is one of about 20 that we have, all of them either regarding store accounts or bonds and agreements. So this is a bond between Katharina Brett and a tenant farmer named Jacob Mazier. Now, the whole idea of how you make money as a landowner, as in you have freehold title to the land, not leasehold or renthold, is that you turn around and rent that land out to people who are actually going to clear it, build houses on it, farm all of that lovely winter wheat, and then give you a certain amount of it. So this is an agreement that's executed between Katharina and Jacob in February of 1722. And you'll notice up there and in our next document, there's a reference to 1721. At this point in time, the English are on a different calendar, the Julian calendar rather than the Gregorian calendar. So their new year starts in March instead of in January. That all gets resolved in the 1750s. But prior to that point, we have to do a little bit of creative bookkeeping. But here he promises to pay Katerina Brett about 30 shekels of wheat, and that's my rough translation of Dartiga, because not only is this written in Dutch, this is written in phonetic Dutch, because there weren't any dictionaries or standardized spelling for Dutch in the 18th century Hudson Valley. So he's promised to pay her 30 shekels of wheat every year in order to maintain his rent. And again, this is February 1722, foreshadowing that things might not, in fact, go the way they are supposed to go. Now, remember, her maiden name is Rombout. Why is this a big deal? Well, if you look on the left here, you'll see a lovely map that we have on the second floor of the county office building here at 22 Market Street that you can come and see yourself, which is of the Rombout patent and a division of it in 1760. But Bill Jeffway has helpfully made it a lot easier for us to understand what the Rombout patent means with this detail of a map he put together for me, and you'll see a larger version of it later in our presentation. But as you look at Rombout, you might recognize some lines in there that seem familiar from a modern map of Dutchess County. And that's because the Rombout precinct includes all of modern Wappingers, Fishkill, East Fishkill, the city of Beacon, and about half of LaGrange. So this is a tremendous amount of land. Katerina is the daughter of one of the 3 and later, I think, 4 partners who purchase all of this land. So that just gives you an idea of how important she is geographically speaking. So February of 1722, everything is going great. She's got Jacob Messier settled down. Then it's October of 1723. The Dutchess County Court of Common Pleas is meeting, and here is Katerina entering the debt suit against Jacob Messier, because it turns out, despite all of the promises made, Jacob has failed to deliver his shekels of merchantable sweet, because the sour stuff is not gonna cut it for this purpose. Sweet merchantable winter wheat has not shown up. Katerina or her representatives have asked for it multiple times. So what do you do when a tenant isn't paying? You take them to court at the Court of Common Pleas, and in this case, you file a narrative, and you say, not only does this fellow still owe me 34, in this case, shekels of winter wheat, but he also owes me 10 pounds in damages on top of that, and that's an astronomical sum. These folks might generate maximum about 4 pounds New York State currency from a standard size lot during this period. And please do not ask me what the measurement of a standard size lot is, because we're still figuring out all of these property divisions. Nevertheless, Katerina does not take this case all the way. This is more or less a shot across the bow of Jacob Messier to give him a warning that, hey, I'm serious about this, please give me the wheat. And we know that because on the back of the document, the clerks record various information, because they fold these things up to file them, and they want to know when they pull it out exactly what they're going to see when they unfold the document. At the bottom there, you'll see this Latin de bene esse until special bail put in. So what does de bene esse mean? It essentially means hold off on filing this until I tell you to do it. So it's effectively a favor that's being done to Jacob Messier to give him a chance to either come up with payment or come up with someone to secure the payment in his stead, a surety to say, okay, if he does not pay up in a year or so, then I will come in and pay the debt on his behalf. So there's an insight into Katerina. We have a couple of other documents about her in the collection, and you can read more about this case and others in the upcoming 2022 issue of the Dutchess County Historical Society Yearbook, because I will be entering an article based in part on this presentation, but expanded, talking about these and other cases. So moving ahead, we're jumping up to 1754, and this is one of those cases that involves violence and women, specifically a woman named Elizabeth Reihart. She lives in Old Rhinebeck, which is now more or less the intersection of routes 9 and 9G. We have a map in just a moment for you. She, like many of the German settlers up there, is a worshiper at the Lutheran Church, which no longer stands. Its replacement is the old stone church, which you can see a little bit further north of that site on Route 9G. And the minister of this church is a guy named Johann Christophels Hartwig. If any of you have been to Oneonta, you might have run into Hartwick College, and that is in fact named after him because he gave the money to found that college. But back in the 1750s, he is the minister of several Lutheran churches here in Dutchess County. Specifically in 1750, he's already getting into trouble, but things come to a head on 2 consecutive Sundays in April 1754 when he decides to attack his congregants. And on Sunday, April the 21st of 1754, his target is Elizabeth Reihart. And as you can see in the transcript there, he attacks her with a horsewhip and drives her literally out into the road, Route 9 today, and seems to inflict some significant damage. So she goes to local justice of the peace, gives this brief deposition. We're getting closer to actually capturing the voices of women here saying, this happened to me, please do something about it. He has also assaulted 2 other male members of the congregation. So this is starting to get very heavy, but we know from some previous research that back in 1750, the various congregations had been complaining about him, so much so that the Reverend Henry Muhlenberg, and he's a big name down in Pennsylvania, both his church and his home are still preserved as historic sites today. He's effectively the head of the Lutheran Church in North America at this time. He travels all the way up to Dutchess County in the fall of 1750 to meet with these various churches and to try to smooth things out between all of the congregants and the minister Hartwick. And in his diary, he actually notes that he's made this trip, he's done the best that he could, but he's not terribly confident that the Reverend Hartwick is going to behave himself. And on the right here, you can see a period map and drawing of where that church was, where this unfortunate incident happened to several congregants, including Elizabeth Reihart. And for those of you who may wonder, well, what does this site look like today? If you're going north on Route 9, there is a great view of it. The cemetery survives. There is a New York State historical marker down here, and Way Road, which of course is one of our historic byways because Route 9G did not always exist. So what happens? These complaints from a justice of the peace are sent down to the court in Poughkeepsie. Johann Christopher Hartwick is presented to a grand jury, and they find him, they indict him for assault against these 3 congregants, including Elizabeth, and they mention her specifically there. And that portion there of her life, there was great despair and other harms, etc. That's pretty standard language, but it gives you an idea that this was a pretty serious physical altercation. What ends up happening to Hartfels is that he is indicted, and then he pleads it out. So he pays the court costs, he goes away, but then a couple of years later, we have in 1759 an arrest warrant that is sworn out for him. And so we know that the problems continue to go on for Mr. Hartwick, that he is still in the area as late as about the 1790s when he finally passes away and the rest of his estate goes to form Hartwick College. And I did, for Nancy Kelly, whom I know is in the audience tonight, I did try to look up the Reiharts and Henry Jones's work. Unfortunately, didn't find any information on them. However, the Reiharts and many of the other German immigrants who took up residence in early Rhinebeck are the focus of an ongoing project here. So you can hopefully look forward to hearing more about them and their experiences in 2023. Now, moving forward, we are getting even closer to hearing the actual voices of the women themselves. In this case, Rachel Snyder. She is a resident of Livingston Manor, which is modern Columbia County, but she is by birth a Hotelling, and the Hotellings live in what is today mostly the town of Washington, the town of Stanford. At that point in time, this being the 1760s, it is in Charlotte precinct. So what's happening? Well, in December of 1761, Rachel is down visiting her father and witnesses a disturbing incident that leads her to go to a justice of the peace on December 16th and swear out this statement. And she says that her father, John Hotelling, is standing outside of the house and he sees a a character of some local ill repute, Captain James Isaiah Ross. And there is a whole bunch of additional stories on Ross that we'll save for another time. But he's riding down the road. There's been some issues at court between Father Hotelling and Captain Ross. So Mr. Hotelling decides that he's going to load his musket. He's going to sneak down to the roadside, hide in the bushes or wherever else he can, wait for Ross to ride back down the road and shoot him. So at this juncture, Rachel and her mother and her brother try to talk him out of it. He won't have any of it. So he goes down there, waits for 2 hours, and as it gets dark, comes back up and says, well, the wife, of course, as you can see here, according to Rachel, says, well, God was not going to let you do this. And Mr. Hotelling replies, oh, God had nothing to do with it. The devil clearly informed Captain Ross that I was down there waiting for him because this guy's so bad, he must be in league with the devil himself. This is all well and good. So clearly, Rachel's feeling responsible, maybe a little concerned about her dad, tells local justice of the peace what is going on. But something this serious, especially for a fellow like Captain Ross, means that it's going to be reported up the chain to the county courts, and that means that a grand jury is going to be impaneled. They bring Rachel in May of 1762 to recount her story for them. Unfortunately for them, maybe fortunately for her father, but also unfortunately for Rachel, she has a bit of a change of heart. So when they ask her, and so this previous record of what Rachel said was read into the record by the Justice of the Peace because he wrote down a record of that examination. Rachel then tells the jurors when they say, all right, tell it to us again fresh, that she has no recollection of the events in question, no idea what all of this stuff is. She's sworn an oath on the Holy Evangelist both times. So either she was lying the first time or she was lying the second time. Either one counts as perjury, and the grand jury goes ahead and finds her, indicts her for perjury, for which she would have to stand trial. We don't have any more of the rest of the story on that at this moment. Now, Mary Jackson, this was one of those cases that pops up and you do, or at least if you're me, you do a double take, because we know that there was enslavement here in Dutchess County throughout the entirety of the county. It tended to be focused in Western Dutchess, including in Poughkeepsie, where I'm broadcasting from tonight, but there were plenty of enslaved individuals in Eastern Dutchess as well. What I had not known, at least from a primary source until this one popped up, was that Dutchess County was also a refuge for escaped enslaved individuals, self-emancipators, as we might think of them today. Of course, they might come to Eastern Dutchess because that was an area dominated by Quakers, the Society of Friends, at least certain branches of which were against slavery and were moving from the 1760s towards initially not purchasing any more slaves, and then a little bit further on, emancipating the slaves that they did own. That led to the Hicksite split. For those of you who know a little bit about Quakers, there was a big split in the Quaker Assembly just past the Revolutionary era between those Quakers who were happy holding enslaved individuals and those Quakers who were not so happy. But again, a story more about men than about women, and for another time. But here we have Mary Jackson. She is a self-emancipated person who escaped from the colony of Rhode Island. She is brought before Ephraim Payne, who, for those of you who are coming in from Armenia this evening, you know him well. For whatever reason, we have a lot of documents from all of the justices of the peace of Armenia surviving. Mary Jackson has been brought before Ephraim Payne to answer this charge that she has stolen some material from a local resident. Specifically, she's stolen some items of wearing apparel, an apron and a woolen petticoat. So while she's there, we don't exactly know what she says specifically, what questions she asks him, he asks her, but she does admit that she escaped really from Rhode Island 4 years earlier in the company of another individual, a person of color. It's not said here whether or not he was enslaved or free, James Leach, and that they had been living in Armenia since that time. She also admitted her guilt that she had taken these items from Mr. Jones. The rest of the story is a little bit on the fuzzy side. So we know the part of this that happened beforehand. She was enslaved by Daniel Curtis. She escaped around 1771. She lived for 4 years, give or take, in Dutchess County without coming to the attention of the authorities. But now, not only is she up to the attention of the authorities, she is admitted guilt to a criminal charge. Our only clue to what happens next is this one note on the back of this examination, and it says Daniel Curtis of Narragansett, which at the very least leads me to think that a copy of this was probably sent back to Rhode Island to inform Mr. Curtis that Mary Jackson was in Amenia, or at least in Dutchess County, because she may have been arrested and sent to the county jail to be held, and that he may want to come and play a role in subsequent proceedings. But as of yet, we don't know the rest of the story. I have done some basic research trying to locate, for example, a runaway ad that Daniel Curtis might have placed in colonial newspapers advertising for Mary Jackson. Nothing has come to hand yet, but the search will continue. Now, moving ahead, we have a little less voice of a woman here, but also some interesting data on a woman who is probably, or at least the way I look at this, very self-assured, very powerful for her place in society, but not shielded by the same levels of protection that Katarina Brett would have had. So this is Judith Hooper. We're now past the colonial period. We're 1788. A year later, the United States Constitution would be debated in Poughkeepsie. But earlier here, a complaint is being made to a justice of the peace that Judith Hopper had taken some physical liberties, probably disciplining a minor by the name of Neil McDuffie. And to my mind, this is probably a young man who is potentially a bit too fresh, ran across Judith Hopper the wrong way, maybe insulted her, maybe got up to some trouble. And she took it into her own hands to discipline him. Now, the bigger issue here, of course, is that she has no one to stand up for her, whereas Neil McDuffie does. He has his guardian, Daniel McDuffie, who goes to a justice of the peace and says, hey, Judith Hopper kind of whacked my guardian here, and we're a little afraid that she's going to do it again. Can you do something about this? Now, the justice takes the standard approach, which is to issue an arrest warrant to a constable to go find Judith Hopper and give her two options. Option one is that she will swear out a recognizance of the peace, in which case she'll promise to be good until, and in this case, good means not strike the young Mr. Duffy or McDuffie again until the next meeting of the Dutchess County courts, at which she will have to appear at her own expense. The McDuffies would either appear or no one else would appear. So essentially, if no witnesses came forward to charge her at the next meeting of the courts, she would be let off free. But again, she has to shoulder all of those expenses, and she has to go through the indignity of being pulled into the court, potentially for nothing that she necessarily did wrong. The other option is outlined here at the bottom of the document, was that the constable could take her back to the jail at Poughkeepsie, and that she would be held there until the next meeting of the General Sessions of the Peace and Common Pleas. So you'll note this is July 28, 1788. The next meeting would have been in October of 1788. And if you're wondering, what are the accommodations like at the jail in Poughkeepsie at this point of time, the Dutchess County Historical Society has an answer for you. So this is an image of a jail cell in the 4th County Courthouse, and the one she would have been confined in was the 3rd County Courthouse. But this 4th one was built in 1809. You can see it's not exactly the best conditions to be staying in. And at this point in time, anyone who was incarcerated in the county jail was expected to pay room and board. So yeah, you had to pay rent to stay in the jail. You had to pay for all of the food that was given to you, any bedding, blankets, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I guess the saving grace would have been that she didn't have to spend the winter in this location, but still not an ideal situation to be in. We don't know the rest of that story, unfortunately, but we will keep looking into it. All right, so you've stayed with us. We're getting now to the high point of women's voices here in the ancient documents. We've gone through fighting over illegal liquor sales. We've gone over women landowners who are dealing with men who won't pay their rent. We're dealing with women who are attacked by men and then turn them in to the authorities. And we've seen some women who've been involved in turning that right around on the menfolk. Well, now we see two examples remaining to us of where women are actually able to use the full weight of the legal system to represent their interests and needs. And these are bastardy cases. And the first one is that of Deborah Hambleton, whom, as we noted at the beginning, Bill is featured in our image. So to give you some background on bastardy, in the 18th and 19th centuries, it was actually illegal for a man to father a child out of wedlock. But there's some fine print here. It wasn't technically illegal to do this biologically. The illegal part was to do this and then not provide for the mother and the child, because bastard children and their mothers fell on the poor rates. The poor rates were established under King Henry VIII and then Queen Elizabeth I of Great Britain, specifically and technically of England, way back in the 16th century. And essentially what these said was the lowest division of municipal government, parishes in England, precincts over here in America, is responsible for using tax money to provide food, clothing, shelter for the actual, as they called it, deserving poor folks who are impoverished through no fault of their own. So individuals who have maybe lost a limb or lost a breadwinner, or folks who have who are women who've had relations with men that ended up in a pregnancy and a successful delivery, and then the men don't want to pay for it. So the municipal authorities aren't really going to take this sitting down, because raises and taxes have never been a popular thing, whether it's 2022 or 1756. And you actually have municipal officers who are dedicated to making sure that, at least as we used to know them, deadbeat dads pay their share. Child support is not an invention of the 20th century. So the overseers of the poor were there both to patrol the municipality to see, okay, do we see any unmarried women who are clearly pregnant, and also to be recipients of complaints like that from Deborah Hambleton. So we have Deborah, and we have a document on the left here that is written by a Justice of the Peace. And remember how I said at the beginning, 1721, great example of penmanship. 1756, not such a great example of penmanship. In fact, if you can see my cursor, I have no idea what is going on in this section here, where they have added in about 3 or 4 additional lines of information with little carets, and it almost looks like we have the word piggy here or pie of, not entirely sure. But you get the gist here. So Deborah Hambleton is working in the house of James Vanderburgh. While she's there, she meets Simon Noxon. Noxon's a big name, especially for any of you who've driven on Noxon Road. Well, she and Simon get acquainted, then they get extremely well acquainted, and a pregnancy results from this. Deborah goes to Justice of the Peace William Davenport, who unfortunately really needs to work on his penmanship, and complains she is pregnant at this time, that, you know, Simon Noxon is responsible for my situation. He is making no promises about looking out for me or this child. Something needs to be done, and you're the person to do something about it. All right, so we fast forward to May of 1757. It's been not quite a year here, but the baby has arrived, and thankfully so has Justice of the Peace William Humphrey, who has much better handwriting. Here we have the preserved testimony of a midwife who delivered the young female child of Deborah Hambleton, talks all about this stuff that's going on. And for some reason, oh yes, daughter of Benjamin Hambleton, a respectable member of the community. So she's in there giving her testimony that, yes, I was there, the child was born, there's no problems with the child, perfectly healthy. So we have a legitimate case here to proceed after Simon Noxon. There are other documents in this case. This is one of our better documented bastardy cases, but we haven't brought them in tonight because those are a lot of men's voices. We do Because of those, however, have the rest of the story. Simon knocks and tries to get out of it through the normal, I didn't do this, what proof do you have? Oh, we have testimony of the midwife, we have testimony of Deborah Hambleton herself. In this case, however, a fellow named Samuel Hall comes forward and agrees to pay all of the expenses of Deborah Hambleton and her child. So there is a rest of the story for future research to reveal in terms of why this third party is coming forward to make everything okay. So now we are almost at our finale. We have seen a young woman who is probably taken advantage of as a servant. Well, now we're going forward just a few years, 1758, into a very different social setting. So now we're in what is today Fishkill. It's in Rombout Patent. The previous case, Deborah Hambleton, was out in Beekman. This is Helena Bogardus. This is her examination. And as you can see, there are also some weird parts here. I'm going to hit up Bill for his take on what exactly that word is later on. But as you can see with the transcription, we've got some pretty important pieces of this puzzle laid out. It's December 1758 when Helena Bogardus goes to the overseers of the poor and says, hey, so Jacobus Phillips and I got friendly. We got friendly specifically, and this is a one-off. I've never seen this on her mother's bed. I mean, this is some pretty serious romance going on here. And this happened multiple times. And lo and behold, a baby arose out of this situation. And Jacobus Phillips is the father because he was the only one in this situation with her. So do something about this. And wow, you know, the authorities do something about this. Bogardus, you may not have heard of before because it's a big Dutch name in 18th century Dutchess County. You may or may not run across these folks in modern Dutchess County. I assure you the Bogarduses are still alive and well. Phillips, however, you might have heard of before. You might have, for example, heard of Phillips Manor, or, and thank you, Bill, for this one, you might have heard of Phillips Patent. Yes, that's basically all of modern Putnam County. So this is a family with really deep pockets, not the sort who should be allowed to get away with having the girlfriend and the child paid for by the precinct. So what happens? The overseers of the poor bring in pretty much everyone they can get their hands on. There are about 7 various depositions and examinations relating to this case that are preserved in the ancient documents. 2 of them, other than Helena's, are from women. The first of which is Rachel Itzenbretz, as you can see here. This is 1759. The child has now arrived. She was living in the household, and she talks about, oh yeah, all over last winter, Jacob Phillips was coming to visit. He was very friendly with everybody, stayed over. We were pretty sure that he was courting Helena. So, you know, we didn't think anything of the fact that they spent a lot of time alone together in the house, that he might have stayed over, because it's the 18th century and these things happen. But, you know, it was definitely him. There was no one else. All right, that's great. You know what's better? When you interview mom, because Katerina Bogardus appears, and you know she's not going to hold anything back. She's also going to get John Bailey, a guy with reasonable handwriting, to record all of this stuff. So she says, yeah, Jacobus Phillips, he visited all the time. I thought he was a good boy. You know, there's a whole patent named after him just to the south. You know, never expected that he was trying to just have some fun and not be serious. Then I noticed that my daughter was pregnant, and I talked to her. All right, are things proceeding as they should with Mr. Phillips? And the daughter says, oh yeah, see, he gave me this gold ring. Again, another one-off. Never seen a token of love in a bastardy case before this. So, you know, the ring, clear sign that Jacobus Phillips intends to come marry me later on at some undisclosed point. You know, maybe after the child arrives, that'll make the ceremony a little bit more interesting. But of course, what actually happens, Jacobus Phillips does come to visit. He doesn't come to visit to say, yes, the child is mine, I'm going to marry your daughter, everything's going to be great here. He comes back to say, hey, Has anyone seen a gold ring around here? Because I'm pretty sure I might have dropped one and it's valuable because it's the 18th century and it's gold. So would you mind giving it back? And of course, mom says, no, no, you didn't just drop this here. This is a love pledge. This is a sign that you had at one time intended to marry my daughter. So I'm just going to go have a word with the justice of the peace and the overseers of the poor, and we'll get this all straightened out. It ends up being straightened out with another document that's not featured tonight because it's all men's voices. It's called an order in bastardy. And this order in bastardy sets out a payment plan by which Jacobus Phillips is going to make sure that he covers all of the expenses of Helena Bogardus and the child. And he's going to continue to take care of this child until she's about 12 years of age. So it's all going to be nice and good. And there is a sizable amount of money that is pledged in case he decides not to take care of Helena and the child. So that is a happy ending on that account. Now, our final case tonight, you may have seen it. I hyped it a lot because I love it. We don't have the rest of this story yet, but we're hoping that as we move forward through processing the ancient documents, we will. And that is Jane Hitchcock. We are taking a big jump forward now to 1806. So January 1806, Jane Hitchcock comes to the Court of Common Pleas here in Poughkeepsie, and she makes this narration. So Jane Hitchcock, spinster, harsh, complains of Robert Howe. So what has happened? Previous year, 1805, specifically in July 1805, Jane Hitchcock and Robert Howe had made a promise to each other, and that promise was they were going to get married within 4 months. Specifically, Robert Howe was going to marry Jane Hitchcock within 4 months. And over the course of those 4 months, Jane Hitchcock would not entertain any other suitors, make any other arrangements. Well, guess what? The 4 months comes and goes. Nothing has happened. So January, way past the 4 months. He's had, about a month or so of wiggle room. Jane comes in, makes this declaration to the Court of Common Pleas because she says, look, I waited for 4 months, actually technically more than 4 months. And as a result of that, Robert Howe owes me $500, which is a tremendous amount of money in early 19th century Dutchess County. Unfortunately, we don't have really any other data on this case. We do know that this declaration was filed in March of 1806, so that means it becomes part of the official record, which means the court is now going to move forward on this case. I have tried to track down information on either Jane Hitchcock or Robert Howe. Nothing has turned up except a hit on Find a Grave for Jane Hitchcock, who's buried out in Tompkins County and would have been born in approximately 1796. So, probably not the Jane Hitchcock that we have here, because spinster, what does that mean? Well, it turns out that when you do a search in the scholarship for spinster and you hope that, okay, some historian has studied this, they've figured it out that spinster is age ranges X to Y. Doesn't seem to be the case from the scholarship I've reviewed so far, but the one hit that I have found suggests that in this period of time for New England and the part of New York that we're in here, spinster means any woman over the age of 21 who is unmarried. So yeah, that's pretty much harshing the groove, certainly not the definition of spinster that I would have been familiar with from my growing up days and hearing about spinster aunts further back in the family tree tonight. Or I want to say hello to my mom tonight, because not only did she inspire me to follow this, she gave me a lot of the background for understanding these sorts of genealogical terms. So we have no more information on Jane Hitchcock, but I think it's beautiful to end. We started in 1721 with 2 women being brought before the court. We end in 1806 with a woman bringing basically a fiance who is not going to pull the trigger to court. And at this point, I am happy to accept any questions and do my best to answer them or to write them down for future exploration.